how to evaluate your competitors, probably about once a week or so, from prospects and people that I talk to that are interested in websites or lead generation programs, particularly consumer direct programs, will point out a competitor and say, hey, I want a website like this. They're obviously doing well. So I want to do a little bit of a teardown on one of the websites that I was given, one of the companies that I was given by a potential prospect, and show you kind of how to evaluate this. And so this is not to disparage Janover. I'm just going to use them because that's who I was given. And really, more importantly, I'm trying to show you how to evaluate where that competitor is actually getting their business from, because sometimes we just assume that all of the business is coming from the website, when in a lot of cases it's not. And it's really easy to sort of detect how and where that actual business is coming from. So in the case of Janover, we have obviously a commercial real estate lending website company. But if you dig a little deeper, you're going to find that they're more of a platform play, and their actual business is not primarily coming from the website. The website is functioning more as a branding mechanism and probably to connect them to partners and to help build that business in a way, but not in a consumer direct way. So they're not driving borrowers and investors to the site and then turning them into revenue or monetizing. So let's kind of look through here. There's a couple of key features that will kind of trigger you right off the bat. One, in this particular case, they do sort of have segmented their ideal customer profiles here. They want to talk to borrowers, if that be the case, lenders, and investors. And then of course there's about, and as you go down this page, in this particular case, I was sort of arguing against the fact that websites that have a lot of these kind of moving features typically are not high converting type websites. And I'll take you through a video, or I have a video about sort of optimizing websites for direct traffic conversion. So in this particular case, this certainly will not do this. It's nice, it's beautiful, it's nice to look at, but it's very distracting, and it makes it difficult for an individual visitor to kind of quickly get to what they're looking at. So let's try to figure out how Janover is actually making their money. So the first thing I like to do in this particular case, it's kind of interesting. These are publicly traded, so it's going to be pretty easy for us to evaluate because they have to sort of disclose how they do their business because they are a publicly traded company. But the first thing is, a lot of times that's not the case. So the first thing I want to do is kind of, and I have a 3-step process that I go through. Oops. That's not exactly what I wanted to do. So, okay. So the 3-step process is really to evaluate the website, to evaluate the company, and then the third thing is to evaluate the business model. So first thing that I want to do is evaluate the website. So simply go to my Ahrefs tool, and I'm going to grab this web URL. And let's just see if there is traffic and sort of keywords that would insinuate that they're converting this traffic into borrowers in this case, or even to partnerships. So right off the bat, you can see it's got a decent domain ranking or authority. In this particular case, this is coming from Ahrefs. Keep in mind, I won't go too deep into kind of the SEO components of this, but this is essentially a third party looking at this website. So some of these numbers are going to be a little bit off, and some of these numbers are somewhat objective in a statistical way, but may not necessarily be entirely accurate. So again, a good domain authority. They've done well in sort of building this website in a lot of ways, but as I'm going to show you, there is no reason to believe that this website is accounting for any significant portion of their revenue. One, traffic is really low, so this is a small amount of traffic. And again, this is probably off. This is probably an order of magnitude off. They probably get 1,000 or so visitors a month if I were to kind of interpolate this particular number. But even with 1,000, if they were to convert kind of on an average 2 to 3%, you can see that that's just not enough to generate the millions of dollars that that this particular company is generating. The other thing that's kind of the quickest indicator as to whether or not they're generating direct consumer direct type traffic, and ultimately converting that traffic into revenue or leads, to be more simplistic. This keyword count is really, really low, right? So then when we look into the keywords, we could see that everything on here pretty much is related to the brand. There are a couple of terms that might be sort of related to a product that they would originate, or in this case they're a marketplace, so they're kind of balancing supply and demand. So they're matching borrowers to lenders. It doesn't look like they're directly originating. So that's also really important. If you're a direct originator of this type of product, then again, this isn't going to be the approach. You don't want to mimic what they're doing here, because that's not their business model, right? So, and the other thing you want to kind of look at is the keyword difficulty here. So, most of these are next to no difficulty, again, because they're brand related. And more importantly, because there's really no traffic. This represents the number of searches for that particular term, even something that you think might be interesting, SBA multifamily loans. There's only 30 searches a month for that particular keyword. So that's not going to produce enough traffic. Maybe if you could aggregate all of these, then potentially it'll give you enough traffic to maybe originate a few loans. The other thing is the actual position. So unless you're on the first page, which means this number has to be 10 or less, then you're not getting any of the traffic anyway, right? So there's only a couple of terms here. You could see this. This sort of accounts for the traffic. You can see most of their traffic in that 200 or so number is coming from Janover Ventures, right? So again, it's a branded play, and that's not bad. Again, this is all dependent on the type of business model that you're running, but certainly there's not a consumer direct business model that's happening here. Okay, so then the second thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of evaluate the company, and I always like to start with Sales Navigator here, just to kind of see what this company is about. In this particular case, there's a couple of Janovers I looked before to kind of find the right one. And we can see, let's take a look at all employees. So I want to see the makeup of the employees. If this was a consumer direct sort of engagement, you would see marketing directors, you would see consumer direct, you'd probably see affiliate managers, because you would need to aggregate traffic from some other sites and partnerships and those sorts of things. But you would definitely see some marketing titles in this particular case, and they would probably be in-house or onshore, right? Even if they were using an agency to do a lot of this work, there would probably be some marketing title in and amongst this. And you can see in this case, editorial director is overseas, and then the rest of these are sort of executive level positions. So more strategic folks, some advisors, some partners. Again, advisors, those are probably the advisors is probably their language for sales folks. So these are probably regional sales directors, sort of acquiring, at a regional level, some of these things. So anyway, nothing that would indicate there's any sort of marketing activity going on here. The other place that I want to do in kind of evaluating the company and going into the business model itself is to actually look to see what's on the website itself. So, and you can see, because they are publicly traded, there's going to be a lot of disclosures in here. So the first thing I want to do is kind of take a look at these different areas and try to see what they're doing. So borrowers, again, there is a little bit of accounting for the borrower, but again, this particular page is not ranking, so there's not going to be really any traffic here, right? And in this particular case, you could start to see indications of where they're getting. So these are all banks, right? So there's relationships to banks. So these are lenders. So this is kind of where, any inquiries are going. And then we're going to take a look at lenders. So this again indicates the interest in signing up partners. So again, they're signing up partners here again, but there is no traffic to this page. So again, even partners, lenders, and borrowers, neither one are being acquired through these pages because there's just not enough traffic there. They may point a few people there, and they may have some future designs on monetizing or pushing directly through partners here. But right now, there's nothing to make that happen, right? There's no traffic here to make that happen. And then the investors, okay, we're going to go into the investor relations. This is great because this is where we're going to find out kind of how they do their business, right? So we take a look here. So the first thing is fintech, right? So they're fintech, that's the platform play. They're connecting commercial property borrowers and lenders, right? So they're essentially selling the marketplace, or the software in here is kind of their ultimate play. And then if we go in here and we take a look at our investor presentation, let's take a look. Okay, so there's a platform here. So they're trying to, again, create a marketplace here. They may be hosting it themselves and maybe actually selling that SaaS software. So it's a little bit hard to kind of determine here, but we're going to kind of look through here. Okay, so this is interesting. So this is starting to tell the volumes, and this kind of tells you where the actual business is coming from. So there's 88 million impressions across our website in the last 12 months. So that we know that that's not happening on this particular website. So obviously they're connecting a lot of different partner websites that are getting traffic and that are using this platform underneath as a part of that marketplace. So this right here tells me that there's a whole bunch of other websites out there that they're counting and are connected to this platform, but it is not their primary sort of their actual business website, the janover.co. Here's the other kind of real telltale sign. Unique banks, credit unions, and lenders signed up year to date. So they have 450 lenders and banks and credit unions. So I'm guessing most of their borrower volume is actually coming from these credit unions and banks, and then they're connecting them to the lenders who are another part of that network, right? So most of that volume coming in here, I would guess they're counting or coming off of the banks and credit union sites. And again, I'm all surmising here, but I want to show you that we're kind of building a case that nothing is happening on that particular website that is driving this business. And so you don't want to use that website as a model if you're trying to be a consumer direct lender, right? So again, here's where there's traffic on other sites. They're actually, getting it from probably these partners. And then the core of what they're building or their business model is that AI platform that's doing that matching. So essentially, this is, again, kind of like a lead generation marketplace, right, for this particular type of business, right? And so, again, we get to see some different partners. I don't know that there's too much else to see here. We kind of figured it out, right? So all of their business is happening, and it's probably sales driven, right? You saw a lot of those regional sort of folks in strategic places. They're signing up banks and credit unions, and they're acquiring borrowers, and they're connecting them to lenders who can actually make these commercial real estate. So they're taking out the friction in the middle of trying to get these commercial real estate, these complex transactions, sort of to lenders that can actually approve and get these folks refinanced. And it's going to be a huge market because the CRE market is just kind of a mess with interest rates the way they are and a lot of people needing to refinance. So I think it's a good business model for sure. But again, getting all the way back to kind of where we started, be careful of the websites that you look at and you try to mimic for consumer direct, because there's a good possibility that website is not the core of the business. Again, they're either aggregating affiliates in some cases. They may do some content marketing, but in this particular case, it's not on this website. You have to kind of look for a website just because it's beautiful and it's interesting does not necessarily convert. It has to have traffic, and it has to have the right kind of traffic. Again, you can find that with keywords. You can find out if they're doing paid. And again, you go back in here. We not only did we look at the keywords, but any type of website that's generating a significant amount of consumer direct revenue, so leads, is going to be doing some paid as well. So you're going to look at those keywords. You're going to see if they're doing organic. They have organic volume. They have paid volume. And then if they have all of that and they're doing content, you see content on the website. Again, there's no place, there's no blog or anything, so there's no content here. There's nothing to drive traffic. So anyway, The summary here is when you look at a website, just because it's beautiful, you have to dive a little bit deeper to see if that website is actually doing the work of driving the revenue for that business before you try to mimic that particular competitor